All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. So, the update is finally here, and that means Dante is here. So, let's talk about Dante, as there is quite a bit to go over. He is a bit more complicated than Warframes that we've had recently, as he has a kind of some extra abilities, and he also has a lot of different ways that he can be built. So, first and foremost, in terms of shards, we are going to talk about other shards to put in here, and I am going to put a lot of shards into Dante, but the only one that I do have installed is a Tau casting speed, which is not necessary, but is very nice for Dante. We will go over what else I'll put in these slots, but I wanted to show him without like a full investment of Tau shards, because that's, of course, going to be hard to get for most people. So just the one casting speed for just comfort, and it's also just not needed. Besides that, the full build we have here. Now, this build is very generalist. It's going to be very good at most things. We're growing power because we just, easily do status effects to get some more strength, which is helpful for Dante, and he doesn't need any like curse projection or anything like that. Prime flow for a very large amount of energy. We have 769 nice energy, which is a huge pool to draw on. In addition to that, we have stretch and overextended. The range of Dante's abilities are quite large, but expanding those very greatly I have found to be extremely good for his damage output and just his versatility to matter on wherever we go. And then in terms of strength, currently I am running Transient Fortitude, Precision Intensify, which is just for his fourth ability, so for the purposes of that, it's like 224% strength to start. And then also Augur Secrets. This setup of strength mods is up for debate, and I'm going to show a few different setups that I think work pretty well for him, depending on what else you're going to apply to him. But we're also running Prime Continuity, because while he doesn't super need duration, it is helpful. And then for energy economy, I'm just running Energy Nexus currently, as this is just like a consistent way to have a nice influx of energy. And for our arcanes, we have Arcane Steadfast, which I think this is the first time I've actually shown this off in a build, but for Dante it's very good as he is a spam caster. This is on ability cast, a 20% chance that your next 3 abilities will not cost any energy. This will proc a lot on Dante. Pretty much no matter what you're doing, you're going to cast 3 times to do what you're trying to do. So having that compounding, of course, like 20% chance, it's a 20% chance, which is pretty good. And getting 3 shots at that each time to make your next cycle of 3 abilities totally free is going to save you a ton of energy. And I've had this cycle into itself quite often and just make, entire casting chains just totally free for me. It's actually performed better than Arcane Energize for me overall, and it's also much easier to get if you don't have it. So this is very helpful. If you do not have Arcane Steadfast or Energize, I would actually probably suggest dropping Secrets in favor of Streamline here to make it so that your energy economy is definitely going to be good if you're not going to use the next tool that we're going to talk about. And then aside from that, we just have Power Drift up here. This could also be Cunning Drift, really could go either way just depending on your taste. Other setups for this that I've tried that are good and depend on just your comfort level and like your kind of outside factors like Zeneric and so on and so forth. Dropping Augur Secrets, moving Intensify up, and then just going for Blind Rage. This is a much higher strength, much lower efficiency setup. I will say I've had more success with this amount of strength going Streamline instead of Energy Nexus. Kind of gives me more shots with Steadfast and have those much more free abilities. And you also kind of save more energy when you hit Steadfast if you are, of course, at much lower efficiency. So this is a way to go with it as well that is going to do considerably more damage. In the vast majority of content, this is not going to be necessary at all, and is super overkill. So we're not going to be showing this today, but I wanted just to point it out because it is, I think, a very solid option. So yeah, there's that, but we are going to be showing it this way. Yeah, it's really good for the build overall. A few different ways to go about him, but this is kind of where I've landed for just generally playing him, and it's quite good. Other stuff. Before we move away from this, I wanted to talk about the shards. I do have 1 Tau casting speed on him. So I like Dante enough that I am going to put a full set of shards on him, but I wanted to show him without it. I will say in terms of the shards that are going to go on here, there's a few options. I think at least 1 casting speed shard is great. 1 more is something I'm going to try, but I don't think he'll need it, but it will probably be nice situationally. The thing that will be really good for him is actually just 4 strength shards with this setup. Much more strength is much more damage output, and it is going to mean, generally speaking, that going to the Blind Rage build isn't going to change much, but also it'll make that even stronger, and so on and so forth, and it'll help some helmets that you could also choose to go with, that we'll get to in a moment. In terms of his kit, he does have his Exalted Weapon, which is the Noctua, and I want to talk a bit about this. So, Overall, for Noctua, I have been disappointed with its damage output and impressed with its utility. So that leads me to this build as what I like to run. So this is our multi-shot and fire rate kind of suite here. We have accelerated isotope that has 40% fire rate and also radiation damage, which is pretty fine. And then we have 4 of our invocations. This is actually all of our invocations and none of the canticles, where we get 60% strength if we hit 15 enemies with the alt fire of his one. We also will get 60% efficiency. Also, we can get 60% duration, and we can get 10 energy regen per second. So this all comes together to be, you know, an insane amount of stats. It's 180% power stats and also energy regen, and it's really not hard to keep this up nearly 100% of the time. Like, these are 20-second durations. You can easily use his one more than that because you're just going to be having, like, you know, the fire rate and everything like that is just going to recharge that ability in probably 5 seconds most of the time, I would say. If you don't have all these invocations or don't want to use them this way and you want to use Noctua as a DPS ability, I wouldn't suggest it because I think it's relatively lackluster at that. But this is the build I would probably tell you to run for it. This is just kind of your usual viral heat stuff. I will say this would be a lot better if you had access to an arcane, like a merciless arcane or something like that. Unfortunately, you do not, which is a lot of the reason why I decided to go much more utility focused. I will also say that some of these could be considered instead of accelerated isotope. Like, you could go with like Jahu for like armor stripping potentially, but I'd say probably Subsume instead of this is going to be the route to go down if you feel like you're going to need an armor strip. And then the Craw Canticle is also a consideration. The other two I probably really wouldn't go for. Lock Canticle is just like worse accelerated isotope. So in general, I would say if you're going to consider one of these, probably Craw or Jahu are going to be the ones you're going to want instead of this. And the rest of this is going to stay pretty much the same. With that, talking about his abilities and different subsumes that you can do, I have decided just to keep Noctua for now. I will say situationally, you will probably want a Helminth. If you don't have the invocations and stuff for like the energy regen and stuff like that, Noctua I think is not going to do much for you, and you're probably just going to want to go straight to Nourish. Nourish is going to solve your energy economy very easily and make things a whole lot smoother for you with very little upkeep. Even in its nerfed state, it's still going to be very good at that exact particular job. The damage added probably won't really matter at all, but the energy economy is going to be what you're there for, which is what Noctua is already solving with the build that I have on it. So if you don't have that stuff, Nourish is a good choice. In terms of armor strips, there's a lot that you could probably go for here. Terrify is probably one of the better ones. You could opt to go Pillage and with like some strength shards get to like 200%, so you could double cast it. And that would be probably fine, though I think that's not necessary. And because of the big range on Dante, you're probably more likely to have more success with Terrify, actually. Or alternatively, if you only need it for big targets, you could go with Styanax's armor strip from the helmet system, and that's going to be very solid in the 1 range as well for stuff like Acolytes and things like that. Just setting enemies up to die to just whatever other guns you happen to bring with Dante. But yeah, overall, very happy with the build, and it performs quite well. Talking about what is in this, we're going to just go over all of the things that his abilities do and just show them. So his 2 and his 3 are both verses. So his 2, this little shield motion, this gives you Overguard, and in the bottom right, you can see it has filled the left page. I can cast this again, and it will totally fill the page, giving me access to my 4, one of the versions of my 4. In this case, when you use your 2 twice and then you use your 4, you get a huge burst of Overguard, which you can see in the top right. I have about 12,000 Overguard, which is great. And you get a lasting buff that whenever you kill enemies, you generate more Overguard. This is really, really good and is amazing survivability for Dante. I have had no trouble surviving anywhere with this, and it has been just great. It is also for the entire party, so it is a wonderful support skill, and it's very unlikely anyone is going to die if they are near you and you're surviving, because your survivability is for everyone. So that is excellent. Moving on, just to go one at a time, we have his 3. This is, as you can see, it also destroys boxes. This is a big conal 50-degree just damage. It just does slash procs on everybody in the vicinity. It hits twice. You can actually turn it and like the first hit will hit a certain angle, and the second hit will hit wherever you happen to be looking next in a row. And after you cast that twice, whenever you use your 4, you cast Tragedy. Tragedy does a few things. Number one, it is a big chunk of damage that ignores walls, so it can easily kill fodder enemies kind of throughout the map, especially with its very big range. But more so than that, it actually cashes in damage over time, that being Toxin and Heat and Slash. Obviously, your 3 applies Slash, and whenever you cash it in with your 4, that gives you all of that damage that ignores armor at once and applies a very significant multiplier to it, allowing you to use your 3 twice and then just nuke rooms. Basically, anyone that you're looking at most levels of play are just going to evaporate if you end up casting your 4 with the 2 dark verses. In addition, there are 2 other versions of the 4. We have the light verse and then the dark verse, and then this 4 gives you a copy of your book. This will like shoot alongside you and give you like the buffs and things like that whenever you're using the 1. I think it has to target an enemy, I believe. This buff, or kind of, well, I guess it's not really a buff so much as like a extra weapon, I've found to not be particularly useful. It's fine, but most of the time I don't bother to summon it, as I'm really only using the book for its alt fire to get the buffs. With that, the other version of this shocked me with how good it is, which is just dark verse into light verse. This gives you birds. The birds are shockingly good. So these, basically all 3 of them, work as a Loki decoy, making all enemies essentially not look at you, which pairs really well with you already being very hard to put down with your Overguard. But even beyond that, they will also apply slash procs to any enemies that they hit, and are like just super, super long lasting. Like all of the effects that have a duration for Dante's 4 last ages, so these are going to be flying around for a good long time, just doing good stuff. In addition, they have one extra effect, which is when they're hitting enemies, they actually charge up your secondary fire on your 1. So this is one of the ways that makes it just super, super easy to continually just use your alt fire on your book, so that you have all those extra power stats and extra energy regen all of the time. So combining all this stuff, let me just refresh this so like nothing's active, so I can kind of show how you're generally going to set up. We're going to show this against your usual suspects, although at 25 levels higher with this new simulacrum, the 20 corrupted heavy gunners. So generally speaking for this, you're always going to start off with 2 casts of your defense, and then from here, well, you're normally going to want to use your 1 and buff, but from here you can just cast your dark verse twice and then hit 4. And when you cash that in, most of these enemies are dead or barely alive at this point. And that is what you are mostly going to be doing. These are obviously very high level enemies. It is worth noting that this ability combination does have some blind spots. And what I mean by that is that this is very, very good against armored enemies, where slash is very, very good. Against some enemies, like the tougher enemies and the murmurs, where they are mostly just a absolutely gigantic bag of health, it's going to do significantly less, especially in Steel Path content. In non-Steel Path content, it's going to be whatever. You're probably not going to notice. The only enemies that you're really going to notice it on are enemies that have limited status vulnerability. So that's stuff like the Acolytes, the Disruption targets, Kuvaliches, and stuff like that. Other than that, it works on pretty much everything. And that is excellent. So against most things, that is going to be great. Against everything else, I would suggest you bring a gun. If it's going to be an enemy that is invulnerable or like not very weak to status stacking, you're going to be much better off just shooting them, and you're not going to have much trouble shooting them because, of course, you can just cast your 2 twice and then throw on a huge chunk of Overguard that's going to generate as you kill enemies, getting up easily, especially if you're using the Blind Rage version of this build, to like 40 or 50,000 Overguard, which is going to take enemies quite some time to get through. And if you're combining that with, of course, the birds that I mentioned before, most of the fodder enemies are going to be focused on the birds and not you anyway. So yeah, overall, Dante's really good. His damage output has been stellar, and even in situations where, like, I took him to the mission where you farm him, which is the Steel Path of Disruption that is new to the labs, and he performed fantastic. Obviously, I had to use a gun for the actual like necromech enemies because they are basically immune to slash damage. But besides them, I was just killing full rooms of dudes with absolutely no issue whatsoever. And just really no problems to be seen. No one dying in the squad. Everybody just had massive amounts of overguard, and it was just stellar. So, very happy with Dante. Let's jump into Steel Path to test him out, and it's gonna be a bloodbath, especially if you get good tiles for him. Alright, jumping on into Tav, as is the usual. But yeah, been very, very impressed with Dante. His kit is super fun. It's super fun. It works on, like, well, basically everything because his survivability is very good. And it's just been great. Like, I am very excited to actually throw, like, a good chunk of shards and stuff on him. Just to see how much better he performs with them. But, of course, I didn't want to do that until I was, you know, past this video. Because I didn't want people to think that, like, he was going to need the shards. Because he very clearly doesn't need the shards. You can see, like, just how, like, incredible this is. Throwing on his one, we can actually just, like, shoot back here to get this. We'll get his birds out now. It may be hard to notice Steadfast proccing here, but whenever my energy's not going down when I'm casting, that means I proc Steadfast, which should happen relatively often. Also, just get my big shield, 25,000 overguard, and like I mentioned, that is for the entire party. So, I mean, if anyone's even kind of close to you, they're also going to get that big shield. So, excellent for group play, especially if you're going into like Netricels in a group. He can just, you know, make sure nobody's going to like foolishly die or anything like that. Xmas are also no problem for him, as like the big damage from his 4 does, like, you know, plenty to get through that. It might take a couple casts or whatnot, but it really depends on how many 3s you've cast in their direction, if I'm honest. But just, like, really good. It's also worth noting that you can cast his, like, 3 a bunch of times. Like, I can look in this direction, cast 3 a bunch, and then, like, look back here and cast 3 a bunch, and still just cash in my 4. Also, worth noting is in order that you cast them is how it enters the book. So if I cast my 2 and I just cast 3, obviously I'd be set up for getting my extra book. But if I cast 3 again, now the last 2 I cast are dark. So that's just going to be my big AoE instead, which is very good that you can kind of just get, like, whatever the last 2 you cast is. You don't have to get locked into, like, using your light verse if you accidentally hit the button whenever you don't need to, or if you just need, like, a temporary overguard shield and then need to get back to DPSing right away. You can, like, you know, take down enemies so that they're not shooting you anymore, which is a nice form of tanking as well. Yeah, just in general, just, like, super, super smooth. Like, just really, really just, like, a clean Warframe. Feels good to play. Has, like, very impactful feeling skills. Just super solid. And, like, the option select on him to, like, remove his 1 in favor of, like, an armor strip or things like that, they don't feel necessary, but they do feel like choices that you can go towards to, like, specialize him a little more. Because, like, as you can see, his current specialization is wanton destruction of any kind of armored unit, and he's very good at that. So being able to add things on top of that, whether that's, you know, specifically targeting, like, Demolus, or, like, bringing, like, Roar. Roar is a good option if you want to, like, double down on his, like, 3+4, because Roar will increase all of the slash proc damage very significantly, and then that will, of course, make your 4 damage way, way higher whenever you do that. So that is an interesting option to go for. And Xmas don't, like, you know, they don't really pose much of a threat to you. I mean, enemies at this level really aren't going to. And for quite a few levels, honestly. Like, until you are seeing enemies that are, like, I would say 300 plus, it's unlikely that most things that don't have those special properties I mentioned earlier are really going to be able to handle, like, what you're outputting to them. Like, I mean, that was just immediately a complete strip of that Xmas of their Overguard and everything like that. Like, they're not really going to be able to handle it. In addition, I think I did not mention, I'm using a Panzer. Panzer spreading viral with him is going to be good for a million obvious reasons. It's going to increase the damage of basically everything you're doing very significantly. Also, if you don't have an armor strip equipped, sometimes they will just rip the armor off of like an Acolyte. Not a thing that you can extremely count on, but is definitely also helpful. Also, whenever the Acolyte does show up here, I am planning on just like killing them with abilities. Obviously, I could just, like, take my gun out and it wouldn't be a big deal. But, like, I just want to show, like, kind of what the general DPS you're getting on enemies that are a little more immune to what your deal is. You see the damage output here of the 4. Kind of letting enemies shoot at me a little bit. Throw my survivability up. I think I'm also not picking up a bunch of the air that's been dropped. I think there's some down at some of the ends of the hallways that I haven't gone to. Kill rate, we're at 512, which is like on rate for like very good. Like that's like my usual bar for is this DPS good? And this is also like long hallways are actually kind of not what Dante wants. He actually prefers big open rooms because he can just kind of spin around with his 3 and like really just go to town on the enemies. And then cash in his 4 on much larger groups, which he really prefers. His 3 is also line of sight restricted, as I'm sure you've noticed. And here's Torment. See, big chunk there. Nope. Torment does have some damage, so we'd have to throw our 3 back up. A chunk. She can purge herself of statuses, which is kind of makes Torment a bad matchup for Dante. Oh, got stripped by the Cato there. And then she's dead. We're actually going to have to go pop a thing because we did not get enough air drops. Which actually is not the fault of Dante here. That's just kind of what happened. We just got super unlucky with airdrops. Because, like, as I said, our kill rate is about 100 a minute-ish, a little bit less than that. So, really actually not Dante's fault here. Usually running that low on air would, like, be the frame's fault, but actually not in this case. Just super unlucky. Like 100 a minute is usually very well and good for keeping up the air. But apparently not in this case. In terms of Acolytes, handleable, not super fast. Bringing a gun that handles Acolytes somewhat decently, going to be more than fine. But just showing like that kind of like weakness to enemies that really can just, you know, shove off on status, as getting big stack ups of it is like what you were looking for. Because the more stacks you get, like the more damage you're going to do against like Xmas like this. Usually energy wise, I've been at like kind of a moderate level. Steadfast, it really like evens out kind of your total used energy pretty well, I find. That's why I mentioned the Blind Rage is kind of like a riskier thing. If you're using Blind Rage, I will say, a thing I'm not doing here is I'm not upkeeping my 1 buffs from this, from like my incantations, or invocations rather. Those are like kind of secondary whenever you're on this kind of a build, because they're very helpful whenever you need to make up some energy, where you need like the rest of the efficiency, and you need just like, you know, the energy generation and all that business. And it's especially helpful whenever like you're early in a mission and kind of just like need to build stuff up and get started, but not super necessary whenever you're just like running regular stuff, unless you're on Blind Rage, and then you're gonna have to make sure you basically have that stuff running 24/7. Otherwise things can go very, very rough for you. We can just get our birds out here. There's some of our life support. Yeah, the birds do way more than I thought. Like, I really thought that the birds were going to be, like, the most useless ability on Dante, where they were just going to kind of be nothing, but they have turned out to be actually just extremely, extremely good. And I think I want to have active, like, a lot of the time. Like, they don't make or break Dante doing his thing if they're active, but especially whenever levels get a bit higher, you're pretty much going to want to always have them around. I know we had that detour. We're about 900. Yeah, so we're like down like 100 kills from what I'd want. Like I said, this is like not a great set of tiles for what he usually wants to do. But like his kill rate, considering like the safety of like, you know, the support buffs and stuff that he can put out, I think his kill rate is like very good. And it varies, of course, tile to tile. And of course, if you want, you know, a much higher kill rate, because you can honestly kill a lot of these fodder enemies in just the 3 casts if you're on a higher strength build, which is part of the reason why I'm going to be adding a bunch of Tau strength shards to him to just make him, like, you know, obliterate Steel Path as opposed to easily handle it, as we've seen here. Mania, who can blow up pretty easily. Mania, luckily, does not have a status cleanse. Got no real problem there. Then we can head to Extraction. But yeah, I've been like super happy with like his performance. His survivability has been great. His modding situation is like pretty flexible. You can really get him going with very little. Like even if you're just on like going full efficiency, just like fleeting and streamline, you can really just like spam most things down pretty easily by just like casting his 3 a little more. And even like, you know, doing like fleeting, streamline, a cast speed, slamming regular flow in there, and then just like whatever strength you kind of can throw in there and whatever duration you can use to like counteract fleeting. Because his abilities that use duration have such high base durations, you can sacrifice a lot of that and really not lose much. So his kind of newer player builds are also pretty damn solid. But yeah, that's Dante. Very cool, very good frame that I think people are really going to like a lot, honestly. I think he's probably my favorite Warframe since Kalervo, which I think probably says a lot about how like fun and good he is, I think. But yeah, that's Dante. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. Tomorrow we are either talking about one of the frames that has a new augment or a Naros. Not 100% sure yet, but all right. Thanks for watching, everybody. And also, of course, thanks as usual to the patrons for supporting the channel, especially the $10 patrons: Alex Parnham, Andrew, Arbiter Daydream, Benuven, Plotomatic, Brutus Salazar, Canalathra, Dylan Dworsky, Ethrain, Havon, James Harsthorn, JC4 Science, John Lobdell, Joshua Adams, Luzanth, Malachx Williams, Mikokel, Minty Ginja, Michta, Nerve, Moxidate, Ruby, Sanyu, Skur, Sharp247, Camarilla Wastelander, The Coupon of Death, Tomeworm, Victor Palmer, Waifu Wars, Waldad, and Seraphir. And of course, thank you to all of the $5 patrons as well. Your support is extremely, extremely appreciated. But yeah, we're about to get the Dante update. Should be an excellent time. Expect tons of videos to be coming about all the changes and new stuff that we're getting in that update, and should be excellent. And then the tier list will hopefully shortly follow.